Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 503 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is impact. Our quote of the day comes to us from Jackie Robinson. A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives. What are you doing on Tuesday, October 22nd? If you are looking to finish 2024 off strong with a plan in place so you can start 2025 on fire, then you need to join us on October 22nd in Norwalk, Connecticut for our second The Accountability Community live event, which we have titled Finish Strong. We have some fantastic speakers, networking, complimentary headshots, food, and some really fun giveaways. We also have some sponsorship opportunities that are still available. You can find out more by contacting me at chris@noquitliving.com. We hope to see you on the 22nd of October. I had the privilege of previously being on our guest today's podcast, which is titled Mission Control, and I'm honored to return the favor. I met Ramon Peralta when we were both speaking at an event a couple of months ago, and we immediately hit it off. I know you will enjoy today's episode. Ramon, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. You and I actually met speaking at an event together. We had communicated on social media, but wanted to ask the first question, which I ask everybody, is are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
Every day.
I knew the answer, but still had to ask the question. When you were speaking at the event, the first question I typically ask each guest is their no-quit story, but I wanted to tee up a question because I think it would really resonate with our audience about when you lost your job and how you were able to transition into it, because I think since, and even before the pandemic, so many people have had job changes, and I think there's one of two ways to look at it, and I won't go into those, but I'd love for you to just briefly share that story because I think it's a very powerful one.
Yeah, thank you. So as we know, anytime there's an economic downturn, there's a spike in new business creation. I didn't know it at the time because it was very devastating for me. This is something that I came to learn later. But you have to imagine what it was like to be part of the dot-com era, the dot-com bubble, and seeing people become instant millionaires all around you, and feeling like you want to get on the next train. And so that was the atmosphere at Walker Digital. Walker Digital was the incubator behind Priceline. And Priceline is one of those few companies of that era that's still around and thriving and recently bought by Booking.com. And I was part of that team as a consultant. Back then, you could be an employee one day, a 1099 the next day, depending on whether investors were coming to visit. And, you had to be lean. And so forth. And so I did not choose to go and work full-time at Priceline. I decided to be part of the next wave at Walker Digital. And so from 98 to 2008, the recurring theme in the office was, this is it, meaning that whatever project we were working on, you were working late nights, long hours, putting your best efforts into it, neglecting your family if need be, coming in on Saturday if need be, because you felt like whatever it was we were working on was going to be the next big thing. And that all came crashing down to a halt in 2008. When the market crashed, our founders' net worth, plummeted, probably went from billions to millions, but, it was essentially enough that the leadership decided it was time to stop innovating. And I was called into his office and I was basically told, your services are no longer needed. And that was devastating to me because I had almost an identity paralysis. I saw myself as someone that was going to exit from the dot-com era and ride off into the sunset and so forth. And that dream came shattering down. And so I think when anytime someone gets displaced, the first natural instinct is to, first of all, you say, why me? But then you start looking at other people and you're trying to figure out, well, this person had it out for me, or that person, or if I hadn't done this, or maybe it was that extra long lunch I took or something like that. Now that I'm on the other side, I realize like a lot of that is predetermined and you're like dead man walking most of the time. Everybody else knows and you're going to work. But I had the grace at that moment to realize that I needed 100% of my energy to be focused on what I was going to do next. And any energy that I spent looking back was going to take away from whatever my next move was going to be. And I call it grace because during that meeting, I was saying the serenity prayer to myself in my head because I was offered a 6-month severance package. And I knew that there's no law in Connecticut where a company has to give you anything. Everyone here is an at-will employee. So I had this feeling of gratitude mixed with fear. And over the course of the next few weeks and months, I had this epiphany that if I had been displaced during this difficult time, there were many other consultants like myself that had been displaced that were now needing to launch their brands. And so I essentially took the skills I had learned working with such a genius as Jay Walker and applied that into building my own team. I wouldn't say it was easy, but it's been a 15-year overnight success where now we've grown and we've got a full staff, 3,000 square feet of office space, clients in over 30 states. In hindsight, I think I said this at our talk. Sometimes the worst things that can happen to us end up being our greatest blessings. And I thank Jay. I've written a book since where I mention him. I've sent him a copy. I know he's doing great things, but I don't regret it. Although at the time it was very difficult, put me in a very precarious situation. I think that you have to focus on what's next and believe that you're right where you're supposed to be.
That was a lot in that short couple minutes. And I want to touch on two things that stood out to me. You didn't say it verbatim the way I'm going to mention it, but it's the concept of things can happen to you or for you. Now, I know me saying that is a million times easier than it is to experience it, especially in the moment. But you also touched on what's next. And I think it's important because it's not about just moving on and saying everything's great. You can still be disappointed. You can still have frustration. Many people will show anger, but there comes to a point, whether it's an hour, a week, a month, for some people, maybe multiple months or a year, but you get to that point and it's cliche, but it's like why there's the rear view mirror is so small and then the windshield is huge because you can't look back. You can still learn and grow. So I love how you shared that. And the last thing I want to mention is you said you were a 15-year overnight success. And for those that are not seeing this on video, I smiled very big when you said that because Hal Elrod, who has a fantastic book and the Miracle Morning, he talks about all the time. He says he was a 10-year overnight success. And I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, 10 years overnight. But I've not heard the 15-year overnight success version.
Whatever it takes. I mean, now I dedicate a lot of my time to sharing some of those lessons that I learned in those 15 years to hopefully get someone else to achieve success much faster. But there is no magic pill. You know this. You put the work in. When I listen to your podcast in preparation, I realized you're on episode 438. I mean, some people think they're going to make one episode and shoot to number one. And you got to grind. You got to put the work in. I think Malcolm Gladwell said it best. You got to put your 10,000 hours in. And I'm grateful for those 10 years I spent there. I put in my 10,000 hours. I put in my 10,000 hours in my craft. And now I can present myself as a subject matter expert. So I think everything that we're put through prepares us for that next level.
I'm glad you touched on the 10,000 hours concept. And there's no scientific study where it's 10,000 or 9,942, could be 11. But the reality is it's so true because it signifies and it symbols the amount of time and effort and or the one small issue, if I could say issue, that I have with social media today is there's nothing wrong with people posting their highlights. And it's like why ESPN in the morning, Sports Center, is so popular. It's because there's those quick little 30 seconds for each game, and you can almost know everything that happened the night before. But what I do have an issue with is when people compare their day one to somebody else's day 100 or 200 or year 4. There's nothing wrong with trying to emulate somebody, but when you go down that comparison game and you're looking at, oh, I can just do this right now, that's where I feel that there's a huge disconnect because you and I have known each other for a while now, and we don't know one single person in common or somebody that we look up to that started something on a Monday and we're just insanely successful on a Tuesday.
No, absolutely. And we're going to fail, during those 15 years. And even while I was at Walker, I remember launching a flavored golf tee company. I was surrounded by inventors and I worked in patents. And so I figured I'm going to create my own product. And you can say it failed miserably. I made some poor choices. I didn't listen to the data. I didn't listen to my customers. I even tried another venture with a partner that didn't work out, all before Peralta Design took off. And one of the guys, local guys that I admire, Larry Janeski, says, fail is your first attempt in learning, right? So as long as you learn something, and as a leader, especially if you have a team that you're leading, they're going to fail. And you've got to create an environment where it's okay to fail, or else they're never going to push the boundaries of creativity. They're gonna just do what you're told. And nobody wants, as much as you think the boss tells people what to do, that's not what a real leader, maybe that's the difference between a boss and a leader. A boss will tell you what to do, but a leader is going to create an environment where you can push the envelope. The worst thing you want to hear is that's how we've always done it. Nobody wants an extra pair of hands. They want brains. They want critical thinking. And those are all things that I've learned, but you learn it by failing. And you got to keep pushing forward.
I could not agree more with that concept. And I get asked all the time when everyone says with No Quit Living and Team No Quit, oh, do you never quit? You never give up? And I think to me, I find it interesting that people always preface it because it's that all or nothing 0-100. But to me, and just my opinion with failure is if you just give up after something gets difficult and you say, I'm never doing this, to me, that I define that as failure because anytime there's pushback, you just say, I can't do it. Now, the flip side of that doesn't mean that 5, 10, 15, 20 years you try no matter what and you go into bankruptcy and your family and all that stuff. But there's a difference of failing and just giving up and saying it's not for me versus like the way you define it, which is how do you learn from this? Because that's a choice. Failure is not a choice, right? No one wakes up in the morning and says, okay, or maybe they do, but I don't know anybody that wakes up and says, I'm going to make these 4 horrific decisions so I can fail by 11 o'clock, right? Nobody wants to. But what happens at 11 o'clock and 11:01 and after, that's a choice. Do you grow? Do you learn? Do you stay the same? So I want to turn the mic around for you for a second because I'm curious, did you always have that mindset of the failure perspective, especially having been let go? Or was it something that over that period of time you've just been sharpening and continuing to learn and improve within that?
I think part of it has been being the oldest child, immigrant parents, watching the sacrifices my parents made, and always having the expectation that me being the oldest, I was kind of carrying the flag forward. I was moving the chains my whole life, setting the example for my younger siblings. Oftentimes, being the only person of color in a room also gives you that motivation that you've got a huge responsibility to represent your entire community. I don't know that every other community has that on their shoulders, but I can tell you that when you're the only one in a boardroom of color, you don't have the option of not making it. And so I've always had this determination, and I've had my setbacks throughout my life, and oftentimes have have found myself feeling that my steps have been preordained. And what I mean by that is that I'm destined, the belief that I'm destined for greatness has been one of my greatest motivators. When I look back on my life, there have been several occasions where, one wrong turn and I wouldn't have made it. And whether that's the urban pitfalls or just my family even coming here, period, had they not come here, my life would have been completely different to this country. And situations like that where I've been laid off and then I bounced back. All of those situations have made me, and I don't want to get overly spiritual on your platform, but I do believe in a higher power, and I do believe in that there are many times as entrepreneurs that you have to walk by faith and not by sight. You have to believe that you're going to get there. You have to believe that things are going to work out, and even if you don't understand your situation in that moment, just having the firm belief that things are going to work out will get you through. And that's worked for me throughout my life.
I love that you preface it that way, because when you look at that idea of faith or everything is predetermined, I think a lot of people default almost to like whatever is going to happen, as opposed to having a faith that I don't see, or I can't see 1, 2, 3 years down the road from now. So obviously, if I could, I'd know exactly what to do. But I believe that based on my actions, based on being consistent with them, and based on, continuing to do what I believe is going to lead down to that, is so important. Because I think when you talk about faith, not just from the religious side but from the faith in regards to that, I believe in myself. And I think it's so powerful. And I often work with, similar to you, with companies, and I also work with a lot of sports teams, college teams, and I'll talk about that belief. And we've had some fascinating conversations where it's not just saying, cross your fingers and say, I believe we're going to win, and you go out and do it. But no, it's you say, you put yourself in the position all week leading up to that game, practice, watching film, sleeping, eating right. And as you go into that game, whatever sport it is, you have that mindset that I believe that we are going to be successful because we put the work in. Now, you still have to put the work in. That's the next phase. I wanted to ask you, with that in line, I know you know the concept of success leaves clues, but yes. I also believe that people don't often mention that failure leaves clues as well. And I think people often look at the other people's successes, and yes, it's very powerful and important to emulate other people's successes. But I also say, well, how did this person learn from his or her failures? And did they learn from it? And if so, what was the outcome? So wanted to get your 2 cents on the failure leaves clues as well.
Absolutely. As a kid, I always loved, and even as an adult, autobiographies for that reason. Like, I love reading about some of my heroes. I've read Steve Martin's autobiography. I found out his hair turned white in his 20s, right? I read about Reggie Jackson, and I found out, his, nobody knows this, but he's Latino and Black. So his Reginald Martinez Jackson, and his father was a tailor, sacrificed for him, and he went through a lot. And Howard Stern, read his autobiography. Like, you read about these guys that you just see as these big heroes or these people, but it's very important to see that success was not a straight line for them. And so what I encourage people that aspire to be speakers or leaders to share their story and not just share the highlight reel. And going back to what you said about social media, unfortunately, that's all we see is the highlight reel. But when you go through and really pay attention to some of the setbacks that have turned into some of the greatest comebacks, that to me is oftentimes the most inspiring aspect of someone's story. And that's where you connect to people. You connect to the human being and not the brand, but you see the person. And all of a sudden you say, if they can do it, I can do it. And it might be just what you need to get you out of bed, to get you on the treadmill, to get you to fire off another resume, to make that last cold call that might lead to that groundbreaking deal that you've been working so hard for.
I think it's really interesting that you touched on the autobiographies, because for me, I'm an avid reader. I'm not a big fiction reader. I love fiction and movies and shows, but when it comes to reading, I really enjoy personal development, sales, entrepreneurship. But I myself have also read a lot of autobiographies because typically, as you mentioned with some of the people that you referenced, you get the entire story. So, for example, you and I talked about, Michael Jordan. There are a ton of books on Michael Jordan's career. He has not allowed someone to per se write an autobiography, which I know you and I would pre-order the minute it comes out. But
I'm wearing my Jordans, by the way.
I got my Jordans on too. That's something that also that we have in common. But going back to Reggie Jackson, I don't have the stats in front of me, so I'm not going to attempt to bring them up. But he's known as Mr. October for his unbelievable home runs he hit in October, which is during World Series and in the playoff runs. But he's also one of the leaders, and I don't know the exact numbers, in strikeouts for his career. And it's a perfect example because he's known as Mr. October. He's not known as Mr. Perfect, Mr. All he did was hit home runs every time, but he's a perfect guy that epitomizes what do you do with that tough situation. So you strike out twice, your first two at-bats. He didn't ever say, you know what, coach, I'm just going to sit this one out. He went up to bat and said, this is my chance. This is my opportunity. Going back to what you said, he had faith in himself because he put the work in. And I think a lot of people don't always dissect those things into why somebody is successful and what are they thinking in their mind. Do they have belief? Do they have faith? Or are they just doing what they do and hoping for an outcome?
And he did it in a very, very uncomfortable environment. He recently came out on, I think it was Fox or ESPN, but he went off, and he basically said, look, I think A-Rod asked him, how do you feel like coming back here? And he proceeded to say that it was with mixed emotions because when he was a player, we love him now. I mean, there was a candy bar named after him. I mean, we love him now, but during his time period, that he played, there were restaurants that didn't allow Black people to eat in. And so some of his, his managers and colleagues would say, if he can't eat here, none of us are eating here. And they would go elsewhere. But you read about these players that suffered all, these great players, Jackie Robinson, Reggie Jackson most recently, but many of them dealt with a lot of adversity from the people that were their so-called fans. And they still became champions. So there's no reason if you've got all the advantages lined, you've got the network, you've got your health, you've got a roof over your head. There's no reason that not only can you go out and be great, but you can help other people while you're at it.
I love that. Fun question we ask each guest is, and I know you know the famous quote by Jim Rohn, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. If I could grant you dinner tonight with any 5 people, dead or alive, that you could level up with, who would you pick for your 5?
Wow. Oh, wow. I wish I had been prepared for that one. Simon Sinek is one of them. I love a lot of his talks. My grandfather, I never got a chance to meet him. He was gone before I was even born. Basquiat, he's my favorite artist. I like to catch him when he was sober, but definitely am a big fan of his artwork. And I got 2 more. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King.
Okay. No Jordan?
I feel like I may run into him somewhere, so I don't want to waste it on Jordan.
I love how you word that, wasted on Jordan. So Jordan, if you hear this, I'm sorry, you're a waste.
If I could pick up, if it's anybody, that's a big pool. I mean, if you had said athletes, I probably would have said Tiger Woods and Michael Jordan and a few others.
All right, so I'm going to add that question. So same thing, athletes. So you got Tiger and Jordan. Who are your other 3?
Tiger and Jordan, Lawrence Taylor, Derek Jeter.
Okay.
I would say John Starks, but I get to play golf with him a couple of times, so I do run into him. I'm a big golfer, so I'm gonna say Ben Hogan.
Okay. I know you're a big golfer, so I knew there'd be one golfer, and you threw 2 in there. We're going to switch over to what we call our hot seat questions. And the only request we have of you is you spit out the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
Last meal, you can pick absolutely anything. What do you pick?
Rice, beans, steak. My mother's cooking.
What's your favorite smell?
Favorite smell. Fresh cut grass.
Favorite sport?
Golf.
Do you have an all-time favorite team?
New York Giants.
Okay, good call. Favorite movie?
Gladiator.
Great film. Do you have a favorite book?
Favorite book. From Good to Great.
That's a very good book.
That's probably my favorite. Jim Collins.
What's your favorite app that you use on your phone?
The favorite app that I use on my phone would probably be Facebook.
Do you have a favorite quote?
It's from If by Rudyard Kipling. If you can walk with kings, nor lose your common touch.
And what's that song, no matter whenever you hear it, morning, afternoon, or evening, you just automatically turn it up and rock out to it?
I think it would be Set It Off by Strafe. It's an old school hip hop song.
That is awesome. So in today's day and age, there's so many people that are out there, and we touched on a little bit as far as with social media. I was curious if there's maybe one or two people that you follow that put out uplifting content that maybe you'd like to introduce or potentially reintroduce to our audience that you feel that would be good to follow.
Yes, definitely. My colleague, dear friend, high school classmate, awesome guy. His name is Chris Jarvis. He just launched his 17th book. It's called Be the Giraffe. It's about seeing life from a higher perspective, how to find happiness in business and life. And he's just a great person. Be the Giraffe. So I would highly encourage you to follow Chris Jarvis. That's Jarvis. He's currently right now top of my list and top of mind because he's going to be here actually next week for a reception. He's flying in from Texas.
And for our listeners, I would love if you could please tell them not only where to find your book, but your podcast. And if they want to connect with you, follow you, or maybe reach out to you for some of the branding work that you do, would love if you could please share those with our audience.
Absolutely. So since we're on video, I'm gonna hold up my book here. Launch Your Brand. You can find my book, Launch Your Brand, at launchyourbrandbook.com. I'm also on the TED channel on YouTube. You can look up my TED Talk. It's geared towards entrepreneurs. You can follow my company on Instagram and Facebook. It's at Peralta Design. That's Peralta Design. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you there as well. And our podcast is called Mission Control, spelled CTRL. And you can find it on all the major platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so forth. So I'm really grateful to you, Chris, for having me on your show. And remember, it's not how far we go, it's how many people we can take with us.
I love that. Say that again.
It's not how far we go, it's how many people we can take with us.
So the last question I asked, you just answered as parting words. Your parting words you just shared are phenomenal. So I know that you and I will connect again soon. For our listeners, I highly recommend you give this gentleman a follow. And if you're looking for anything regarding to branding or some of those things that his company does, make sure you check it out. And I appreciate you jumping on here. And I know that we will talk again soon. Thank you for listening to episode number 503. Ramon shared some really important things with us on today's podcast. In his parting words, he shared an idea that I need to repeat. It is not how far we go, it's how many people we can take with us. I challenge you to take someone with you today. Inspire them, encourage them, and help them get further down the road than they are today. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.